For months, a man living alone in Kasuya, Japan, kept noticing small, inexplicable changes around his home. Food went missing. Lights were on when he returned, but there were no signs of a break-in. At first, he blamed stress, then forgetfulness. But something didn't feel right. Uneasy, he installed a small security camera in the kitchen. When he reviewed the footage, what he saw was deeply unsettling. A closet door slid open slowly. A barefoot woman emerged. Thin, quiet, deliberate. She walked to the fridge, ate calmly, and then vanished back into the storage cabinet above his closet, closing the door behind her. He called the police immediately. When they searched the apartment, they opened the same closet and found her, curled up on a small futon, surrounded by plastic bottles and bags of clothes. She had been living there, undetected, for nearly a year. The woman, 58 years old and homeless, told police she had nowhere else to go. She had entered through an unlocked door and chose to stay hidden, surviving quietly. She used his bathroom, ate his food, and only moved when he wasn't home. There was no confrontation, no violence, just the chilling reality that someone had lived in his home for nearly a year. Lars Mittank was 28 years old when he boarded a flight to Bulgaria with friends, just a casual beach vacation in the summer of 2014. He was healthy, easygoing, and had no history of mental illness. But by the end of the trip, something had changed. A fight at a bar left him with a minor ear injury. He was prescribed antibiotics and told not to fly immediately. His friends left as scheduled, while Lars stayed behind alone in a cheap hotel near Varna Airport. That's when things took a turn. Lars called his mother, whispering that people were following him. He claimed he was hiding and begged her to cancel his credit cards. In hotel surveillance footage, he's seen pacing, peeking around corners, visibly paranoid. The next day, Lars arrived at the airport to catch a new flight home. Inside the terminal, he calmly spoke to staff, then, without warning, bolted. Security footage captured him sprinting out of the airport, leaving behind his phone, wallet, and luggage. He jumped a fence and disappeared into a wooded area. That was the last confirmed sighting of Lars Mittank. Despite global attention, numerous false sightings, and online theories ranging from mental breakdown to foul play, no trace of him has ever been found. His case became internet legend, one of the most unsettling and unexplained disappearances in recent memory. A man who seemingly lost touch with reality overnight, or saw something that made him run for his life. Was it paranoia, a psychotic break, or something darker lurking beneath the surface of a routine vacation? All we have is a few minutes of blurry footage, and a silence that's lasted over a decade. Gloria Ramirez was 31 years old when she was rushed to Riverside General Hospital, suffering from heart palpitations and confusion. She had advanced cervical cancer, but what happened inside the ER that night had nothing to do with cancer, and everything to do with something far stranger. As nurses drew blood, they noticed an unusual oily sheen on her skin and a strange garlicky odor in the air. One nurse saw crystals forming in the blood vial. Then people started collapsing. One nurse fainted, another had muscle spasms. A doctor couldn't breathe. The ER was evacuated. Within minutes, 6 staff members were hospitalized. Ramirez died shortly after, but her body was treated like a chemical threat. No one had ever seen anything like it. Initial theories ranged from poisoning to a bizarre drug interaction. One controversial explanation suggested Ramirez had used a home remedy involving dimethyl sulfoxide, which may have turned toxic in her bloodstream under the hospital's conditions. But the truth remains elusive. Some believe the staff experienced mass hysteria. Others point to flawed medical equipment. The official cause was listed as heart failure due to cancer, but the surrounding chaos has never been fully explained. Her case became one of the most baffling medical mysteries in American history. Deep in the wilderness of Ontario, a man named Roch Thériault convinced a small group of followers that he was a prophet. He called their commune the Antill Kids, claiming they were preparing for the end of the world. But what started as spiritual devotion quickly became one of the most brutal cults Canada has ever known. Thériault's rule was absolute. He banned outside communication, forced marriages, and demanded loyalty through suffering. Over time, his behavior grew more violent and unhinged. He conducted amputations without anesthesia, claimed to heal disease through surgery, and routinely beat, burned, and humiliated his followers. including children. He fathered over 20 children with his female followers and justified every act as divine will. The cult lasted nearly a decade, protected by isolation and fear. It wasn't until a severely injured woman escaped and alerted authorities that the truth came to light. Police raided the compound in 1989. What they found was a landscape of trauma, broken bodies, and decades of control. Thériault was sentenced to life in prison, where he was eventually murdered by another inmate. What makes the story unforgettable isn't just the violence, it's the way it hid in plain sight. A self-declared messiah used faith to justify madness, and by the time the world noticed, the damage had already been done. In 2008, traffic cameras on the M6 motorway in England captured something almost no one could explain. Two women, identical Swedish twins, Sabina and Ursula Eriksson, ran directly into oncoming traffic, one after the other. Ursula was hit by a truck and crushed. Sabina, moments later, ran into the path of a car. Police tried to restrain them, and that's when it got even stranger. Despite her injuries, Ursula screamed that her organs were being stolen. Sabina fought off officers with shocking strength, then suddenly calmed down and was taken into custody. Hours later, released from the hospital, Sabina was taken in by a kind stranger, Glenn Hollinshead. They shared dinner. She stayed the night. The next day, without warning, she stabbed him to death and fled. She was later arrested and claimed no memory of the act. Psychiatrists diagnosed her with a rare form of shared psychosis, folie à deux, where one delusional person influences another. Sabina was sentenced to 5 years for manslaughter. Ursula returned to Sweden. The case remains one of the strangest intersections of mental illness, criminal justice, and unexplained behavior. Whatever triggered that day on the motorway, it shattered 2 lives and ended 1. When police entered the apartment of Anatoly Moskvin in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia, they expected to find old books. He was, after all, a respected academic, a linguist, fluent in 13 languages, and a known expert on cemeteries. What they discovered instead defied belief. Inside his apartment were 29 life-sized female dolls, seated at tables, lying on beds, propped on sofas. They wore dresses, had makeup, and were surrounded by toys. But they weren't dolls. They were corpses. Moskvin had exhumed the mummified bodies of girls aged 3 to 12. He preserved them with a homemade chemical process, stuffed their cavities with fabric, and created makeshift wax masks to give them faces. He told investigators he never harmed them. He believed he was rescuing them, waiting for science to bring them back to life. He celebrated their birthdays and kept detailed journals. Moskvin was found mentally unfit to stand trial and committed to a psychiatric facility, where he remains. For years, no one noticed. He lived with them in silence, his obsession hidden behind academic brilliance. In his mind, he wasn't disturbing the dead. He was giving them love, but to the world, it was something else entirely, something far more disturbing. It was just past midnight when 19-year-old Brandon Swanson crashed his car into a ditch on a rural road in western Minnesota. He wasn't injured, just stranded, and called his parents for help. Calmly, he told them he'd walk toward the lights of a nearby town while they drove to find him. His father stayed on the phone with him for 47 minutes. Brandon described passing fences, hearing water, navigating gravel. Then suddenly, mid-sentence, he said, "Oh," and the line went dead. His parents searched all night. Police joined later, but Brandon was gone. His car was found miles from where he thought he was, with no signs of a struggle, no footprints, no phone, no wallet. In the days that followed, rescue teams searched rivers and fields. Dogs tracked his scent to the edge of a nearby stream, but found nothing beyond it. Over the years, his case has remained frozen in time. No evidence, no theories with proof. Just a teenager, a phone call, and a chilling silence. Some believe he fell and drowned. Others suspect foul play, but nothing has ever been confirmed. Between 1968 and 1985, a serial killer known as the Monster of Florence terrorized the Tuscan countryside. He stalked young couples parked in cars, often in rural lovers' lanes, striking without warning and with disturbing precision. Over 17 years, 8 couples were brutally murdered, most shot with the same .22 caliber pistol. In several cases, the female victims were mutilated post-mortem in a ritualistic fashion. The killer was never caught. The murders stopped, but the fear never faded. For decades, the people of Florence lived in the long shadow of the monster. Theories flourished. Some believed the killer was a lone man with a dark obsession. Others suggested a group, a cult, or even a conspiracy involving powerful figures. Investigators came and went. So did suspects. Some were arrested, one died in prison, but none could be definitively tied to all the killings. Journalist Mario Spezzi became one of the case's most dedicated investigators. Alongside American writer Douglas Preston, he uncovered inconsistencies, bizarre police behavior, and frightening implications, not only about the crimes, but about the investigation itself. Their book, The Monster of Florence, shocked readers worldwide and painted a chilling picture that the truth may have been buried to protect reputations or silence deeper secrets. Despite years of digging, the monster's identity remains a mystery. No DNA, no eyewitnesses, just a trail of bodies, a matching gun, and a country still haunted. To this day, the case remains one of the most disturbing unsolved serial murder investigations in modern history. The killer vanished, but the story never died, and in the hills of Tuscany, many still wonder if he ever really left. June and Jennifer Gibbons were born in 1963 to Barbadian parents living in Wales. From a young age, the twins were inseparable and strangely silent. They refused to speak to anyone but each other, developing a private language no one else could understand. Teachers tried to separate them. Therapists intervened. Nothing worked. As teens, they turned inward, writing eerie fiction about violence, obsession, and death. Eventually, their behavior spiraled. They committed petty crimes, including arson, and were sentenced to Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital. Doctors noted something chilling. The girls spoke to no one else, but when alone, they communicated constantly. June later described their bond as a prison, saying they couldn't live together, but couldn't survive apart. One day, Jennifer told June, "I'm going to die. It's time." Days later, she collapsed and died from sudden heart inflammation. After that, June began to speak fluently. She rebuilt her life, later saying Jennifer's death had set her free. To this day, no one fully understands what happened between them. The silent twins remain one of the most fascinating psychological mysteries ever documented. A story not about murder, but a haunting form of emotional captivity no one could break. We've just gone through the first 10 cases, and already everything feels colder. What comes next stays with you forever. On the evening of September 10th, 2001, Sneha and Phillip, a 31-year-old doctor, went shopping near her Manhattan apartment. Security footage shows her entering a department store. It would be the last confirmed sighting. The next morning, the Twin Towers fell. Her apartment was just blocks away. Her family believes she rushed to Ground Zero to help, that she died a hero. For years, her name appeared on lists of 9/11 victims, but questions never stopped. No one saw her at the scene. Her body was never found. She hadn't gone to work that day, and her phone records were inactive. Investigators uncovered marital issues, a pending suspension from her job, and behavior suggesting she may have wanted to disappear. Some argued she used the chaos of the attacks to vanish. Others insisted she was a casualty, lost in the dust and confusion. In 2008, a court ruled her an official victim of 9/11. But the mystery remains. Was she in the towers? Somewhere nearby? Or did something entirely different happen before the attacks began? In a tragedy filled with unanswered questions, Sneha's case stands apart, because no one knows whether it even belongs to that day at all. Elmer McCertie was a failed outlaw in the early 1900s. He robbed a train in Oklahoma, made off with just a few dollars, and was killed in a shootout with lawmen in 1911. His body was taken to a local undertaker who couldn't find family to claim him, so he embalmed the corpse with arsenic and charged people to see it. Over time, the preserved body was sold to carnivals, sideshows, and wax museums. McCertie became a traveling attraction, passed from hand to hand. His identity was forgotten. His corpse became a prop. In 1976, during the filming of a TV show at an amusement park in California, a crew member tried to move what he thought was a mannequin. Its arm snapped off, revealing bone. The investigation revealed the truth. It was Elmer McCertie, embalmed for over 60 years, passed around like an object, his story buried beneath layers of novelty and neglect. He was finally laid to rest in a proper grave in 1977. His tombstone reads simply, "Shot by Sheriff's Posse." But his afterlife was longer and stranger than anything he did while alive. Elmer McCertie was a man forgotten by history until death made him famous. On a cold February afternoon in 1957, a college student wandering through the woods in Fox Chase, a quiet suburb of Philadelphia, stumbled upon a cardboard box lying in a weedy clearing. Inside was the body of a young boy, naked, bruised, wrapped in a plaid blanket. He appeared to be between 3 and 6 years old, malnourished, hair recently cropped. There were signs of prolonged abuse, but no one had reported a missing child matching his description. Police released sketches. They printed thousands of flyers and even distributed post-mortem photos in the hopes someone would recognize him. But no one came forward. For decades, he was known simply as America's unknown child. Theories ranged from a child sold in an illegal adoption ring to an unwanted child killed by his caretakers. Tips poured in over the years, some sincere, others deranged. Every lead led nowhere. In 2022, over 65 years later, DNA and genetic genealogy finally gave the boy a name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He had been born in 1953 to parents who were identified but never publicly named. Despite this breakthrough, the mystery didn't end, because the truth of how and why he died still hasn't been answered. No charges, no closure, just a name, and a grave that finally bears it. The Boy in the Box is a case that haunted multiple generations of detectives, journalists, and citizens. A reminder that some of the most heartbreaking stories don't start with violence, but with silence. In the late 1800s, people living across western Connecticut and eastern New York began noticing a strange figure walking along rural roads. He never spoke, he never begged, but every 34 days, almost to the hour, he passed through each town, always wearing a hand-stitched leather coat, pants, and a wide-brimmed hat, even in the heat of summer. Locals called him the Leatherman. He slept in caves, accepted scraps of food, and left behind no name, no family, no story. Just his boots on the dirt roads and his presence, like clockwork. Newspapers speculated wildly. Some claimed he was a Frenchman who had lost everything in a failed romance. Others believed he was an escaped mental patient, but no one ever confirmed his identity. In 1889, he was found dead in one of his regular shelters. He had apparently passed peacefully, surrounded by worn leather belongings. Authorities buried him in a pauper's grave with a simple marker, the Leatherman. A century later, historians attempted to exhume the grave for DNA analysis, but it was empty. Either his body had never been buried there, or the remains had long since decayed. The Leatherman remains a complete enigma, a man who spent decades on the move, never harming anyone, never speaking more than a word, yet leaving behind one of the most enduring mysteries of the American Northeast. In an age of oversharing and digital footprints, his silence feels even more haunting. He walked over 365 miles, again and again, for reasons no one will ever know. In a remote part of Bavaria, just outside the tiny farmstead of Hinterkaifeck, the Gruber family lived a quiet, isolated life. Andreas Gruber, his wife, their daughter, 2 grandchildren, and a maid. It was March 1922 when neighbors began to grow concerned. No one had been seen in days. When they arrived to check on the family, they found the barn doors ajar, and what they saw inside would haunt the region forever. 4 family members lay dead in the hay, their skulls crushed by a pickaxe. Inside the house, the maid and the youngest child had been killed as well. The most chilling part? Whoever had done it stayed afterward. Neighbors reported smoke rising from the chimney in the days after the murders. Animals were fed. Food had been eaten. Beds were slept in. Police combed through hundreds of suspects. No clear motive emerged. Some believed it was a vagrant. Others thought it was someone close. Maybe even the former maid who'd quit, claiming the house was haunted. No one was ever arrested. The farm was demolished the following year, replaced by a simple memorial. The Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of Germany's most disturbing unsolved crimes, a perfect storm of brutality, isolation, and mystery. Even now, over a century later, investigators still revisit the files, hoping for a final answer to a case where the killer may have walked away and never spoken of it again. Mora Murray was a 21-year-old nursing student with good grades and a seemingly stable life. On February 9, 2004, she emailed her professors claiming there'd been a death in the family, a lie, and drove 4 hours north into the White Mountains of New Hampshire. That night, she crashed her car into a snowbank on a remote road. A passing bus driver stopped and offered help. She declined. When police arrived minutes later, she was gone. Her belongings were still inside the car. No footprints, no phone signal, no clues. Mora was never seen again. Investigators found she'd been researching places to stay in Vermont and had emptied her bank account before leaving. Some speculated she ran away. Others believed she'd met with foul play. Tips poured in for years, but none led to answers. Her case became one of the internet's earliest true crime obsessions. Forums, podcasts, documentaries. Everyone had a theory, but no one had proof. What makes the case so haunting is how ordinary it begins. A young woman taking a break, heading north. And how completely she vanished in a time when phones and surveillance already tracked most of our lives. If Mora is alive, she's remained hidden longer than most ever could. And if she isn't, the truth is buried somewhere in the snow. In 1981, Isai Sagawa, a Japanese student studying literature in Paris, invited a Dutch classmate, René Hartvelt, to his apartment to read poetry. What she didn't know was that Sagawa had planned that moment for weeks. He shot her in the back of the neck. Over the next 2 days, he consumed parts of her body. He later claimed he wanted to absorb her energy and beauty, that he didn't see it as killing, but completion. He was caught almost immediately while trying to dump her remains in a suitcase at a public park. But instead of life in prison, Sagawa was declared legally insane in France. He was deported to Japan, where, due to a legal loophole, he was never charged. Sagawa became a free man. He wrote books, gave interviews, and became a morbid celebrity in Japan. In TV appearances, he smiled, joked, and even dined with hosts while discussing what he'd done. Public outrage was immense, but legally, there was nothing that could be done. He remained free until his death in 2022. Isai Sagawa's case is one of the clearest examples of a killer who not only escaped justice, but used it to become infamous. A man whose actions were horrifying, and whose freedom was even harder to explain. When Susan Powell vanished from her Utah home in December 2009, her husband Josh said he had taken their 2 sons on a spontaneous midnight camping trip, in sub-zero temperatures, with no warning. Susan was never seen again. Inside the home, police found her purse, cell phone, and ID. Her children told investigators, "Mommy stayed in the trunk." But without a body, there was no arrest. As scrutiny grew, Josh moved to Washington State with his father. That's when things got stranger. His father, Stephen Powell, was arrested for child pornography, including voyeuristic images of Susan. Diaries later revealed he had been obsessed with her. In 2012, after losing custody of his sons, Josh Powell was allowed one final supervised visit. The social worker watched in horror as he slammed the door, locked her out, and set the house on fire, killing himself and both boys. The case exploded in the media, podcasts, documentaries, interviews with family. But Susan's body has still never been found. The tragedy isn't just that Josh got away with it, it's how long he was allowed to live freely, while everyone around him sensed something was deeply wrong. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in time. And when it finally does, it's too late to save the ones who mattered most. Frederick Borden has been called the Chameleon. Over the course of his life, he impersonated at least 500 different identities, mostly orphaned or missing teenagers, despite being a grown man in his 20s and 30s. In 1997, he pulled off one of his most audacious scams. A missing boy from Texas, Nicholas Barclay, had vanished 3 years earlier. Borden, in Spain, claimed to be Nicholas. He was flown to the US, introduced to Nicholas's family, and, astonishingly, they accepted him. He looked nothing like the missing boy, different eye color, accent, age, but grief blinded logic. He moved in, enrolled in school, and gave interviews, all while feeding lies about child trafficking and torture. Eventually, a private investigator noticed the discrepancies. A fingerprint test exposed the truth. Borden was arrested and deported, but he never stopped. He continued impersonating teenagers across Europe well into his 30s. Each time, authorities would expose him, and each time, he would do it again. His motivations remain murky. He claimed to crave love, safety, and family, things he never had growing up. But for many, his actions were unforgivable. The scariest part wasn't that he fooled strangers, it's that he fooled grieving families, and reminded us how vulnerable people become when desperation outweighs doubt. Skyler Nie was 16 years old, smart, outspoken, and like most teens, deeply invested in her social circle. On a July night in 2012, she snuck out of her bedroom window to meet her two best friends. She never came back. At first, it looked like a runaway case, but surveillance footage showed her willingly getting into a car. Her parents insisted she wouldn't just disappear. Months passed with no leads. Then, in a shocking twist, one of her friends confessed. She and the other girl had planned the murder for weeks. They picked up Skyler, drove her to a remote forest, and, on a count of 3, stabbed her dozens of times. When asked why, the response was chilling. "We just didn't like her anymore." The girls were charged as adults and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. But no sentence could explain the coldness of their actions, the betrayal of a friend who trusted them completely. Skyler's story shook the nation, not because of its violence, but because of how ordinary it seemed. No warning signs, no gang ties, just teenage jealousy, turned deadly. Her parents fought for legislative changes afterward, including Skyler's Law, improving response times for missing teens who don't meet typical Amber Alert criteria. In her memory, the law helps others, but her death remains one of the most haunting examples of how trust, when misplaced, can become a weapon. In 2019, a young man walked into a Dutch bar, disoriented and confused. He told staff he hadn't seen the outside world in 9 years. Police soon discovered his story was real. Authorities raided a remote farmhouse in the village of Runervault. Inside, they found 6 siblings living in isolation in a hidden basement. Their father, a former carpenter, had moved them there years earlier to await the end of days. The children, now adults, had no birth records, no schooling, and no idea what the outside world looked like. One sibling had escaped previously, but was caught and brought back. They were essentially off the grid for nearly a decade. Their father, bedridden from a stroke, was arrested along with another man believed to be complicit in maintaining their captivity. The story shocked Europe. How could so many disappear, not in the past, but in the internet age, without anyone noticing? Interviews with the siblings later revealed deep trauma, confusion, and difficulty adjusting to the outside world. Some remained supportive of their father. Others expressed quiet relief. It wasn't a cult. It wasn't an abduction. It was a family, hiding in plain sight, believing the world had already ended. And for nearly 10 years, no one knew they were even missing. Derek and Maria Broaddus had just bought their dream home in Westfield, New Jersey, a 6-bedroom house in an upscale neighborhood. They were ready to move in with their 3 kids when the first letter arrived. It was addressed to the new owner and signed only by the Watcher. The writer claimed their family had watched the house for generations, and now they were watching the Broadduses. They referenced the children by nickname and seemed to know intimate details about the home. More letters followed. The Watcher claimed to crave young blood. They mentioned walls that held secrets. The tone was unnerving, never outright threatening, but increasingly invasive. Police investigated, but no fingerprints, DNA, or clues emerged. The Broadduses installed cameras, hired private investigators, and delayed moving in. Eventually, they sold the house at a loss. No one was ever charged. Some suspected a neighbor. Others believed it was a cruel prank. The family maintained they had never fabricated a thing. The Watcher never wrote again. The story inspired books, documentaries, and a Netflix series, but no resolution. Just a beautiful house, and a stranger watching. For the Broadduses, it wasn't about ghosts. It was about real fear, the kind that seeps in when you realize you're not alone, and someone doesn't want you to feel safe in your own home. When Michael Swango graduated from medical school, he already had a nickname among classmates, Double O Swango, a morbid joke suggesting he had a license to kill. At first, no one took it seriously, but then patients under his care started dying, unexpectedly. Nurses noticed he was often the last person to administer medication before these unexplained deaths. Complaints were filed. He was fired from one hospital, but moved on to another, and another. Over time, he forged documents, changed states, and continued working in hospitals that never knew his past. Everywhere he went, death followed. Sometimes he poisoned patients, sometimes coworkers. In one case, he made a nurse violently ill after bringing her tea. Authorities eventually caught on after linking patterns of suspicious deaths across multiple hospitals. Swango fled the US, but was extradited in 1997. He later admitted to causing the deaths of up to 60 people, though some believe the real number is higher. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The story of Michael Swango exposes a chilling truth. Not all serial killers lurk in shadows. Some wear white coats, hold licenses, and hide behind the trust we place in those meant to save lives. His case led to sweeping reforms in hospital hiring practices, but not before dozens had already paid the price. For 7 years, Cindy James reported being stalked. She told police she'd received threatening phone calls, been followed, attacked, even drugged. Sometimes she was found bound with ropes, disoriented, bruised, but still alive. Authorities were skeptical. There were no witnesses, no suspects, and bizarrely, no signs of forced entry or stolen property. Some believed Cindy was faking it. Then, in 1989, she disappeared. 2 weeks later, her body was found in a ditch, hands and feet tied behind her back, with a lethal dose of morphine in her system. Despite the restraints, police ruled it a suicide, claiming she had staged everything herself. Her family and friends rejected that conclusion. They insisted she was murdered, possibly by someone she knew, or someone police refused to pursue. The case remains a mystery. Every theory, suicide, murder, delusion, has flaws. How could she tie herself so tightly? Where did she get the drugs? Why would someone fake torment for years just to die in silence? Cindy James's story is disturbing not only for what happened, but for how little we still understand it. Whether she was a victim or a mastermind, the truth was buried with her, and no one has ever brought it back to light. Dennis Rader was a family man, Boy Scout leader, church council president, and for over a decade, one of America's most elusive serial killers, known as BTK for Bind, Torture, Kill. Rader taunted police and media with cryptic letters, detailing his crimes with chilling precision. Then, in 1991, he stopped, disappeared. The trail went cold. For the next 13 years, he lived a quiet suburban life in Wichita, Kansas. He installed home security systems, attended potlucks, gave sermons. No one suspected a thing. In 2004, on the 30th anniversary of his first killing, BTK resurfaced. He began sending letters again, eager for attention. But this time, digital forensics caught up. A floppy disk he mailed was traced to a church computer and to Rader himself. Police arrested him in 2005. In court, he calmly described each murder in excruciating detail. No remorse, no hesitation. The community was stunned. This wasn't a shadowy stranger. This was the man who sat next to them in pews and led youth groups. Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. His story is terrifying, not just because of the crimes, but because of the mask. How easily someone can live a double life, and how long it can go unnoticed, even in plain sight. On May 25, 1979, 6-year-old Etan Patz left his apartment in Manhattan to walk to the school bus stop, just 1 block away. He never made it. His case became one of the first child abductions to gain national attention. Etan's face was the first ever printed on a milk carton. The entire city mobilized. Posters covered lampposts. Search dogs combed alleys. But no trace of him was found. The case went cold for decades, though rumors pointed to a neighborhood handyman and other suspects. In 2012, Pedro Hernandez, a former bodega worker, confessed to strangling Etan in the basement of the store and throwing away the body. He was tried and convicted, but the confession had inconsistencies. No physical evidence ever tied him to the crime. And critics questioned his mental state. Despite the conviction, Etan's parents still don't have answers about what truly happened. His disappearance forever changed how missing children are handled in the U.S. May 25th is now National Missing Children's Day. Etan Patz became a symbol, not just of loss, but of every parent's worst nightmare. A child stepping into the world and vanishing before anyone could say goodbye. In 1968, 2 young boys were found dead in a deprived neighborhood of Newcastle, England. What shocked police wasn't just the nature of the crime. It was the age of the person responsible. 11-year-old Mary Bell confessed to being involved in both deaths. The victims were just 4 and 3 years old, and investigators discovered unsettling notes and markings near where the incidents occurred. Mary's early life was marked by instability. Her mother struggled with serious personal issues and was said to have treated her harshly, both emotionally and physically. Some reports suggest Mary may have been placed in harmful situations during her early childhood. During the trial, her defense team argued she lacked full awareness of her actions due to underlying psychological conditions. She was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to be held at Her Majesty's pleasure, an open-ended sentence used for young offenders. Mary was released at 23 and granted lifelong anonymity. She later changed her identity, started a family, and won legal protection to keep her child's identity confidential. Public opinion on Mary Bell remains divided. Was she naturally dangerous or shaped by a childhood filled with trauma? Few cases so deeply blur the line between accountability and environment, and even fewer end with the person responsible living in complete anonymity among the public. For years, Clark Rockefeller moved in elite circles, attending Harvard mixers, buying fine art, and charming wealthy women. He claimed to be part of the Rockefeller dynasty. Few questioned it. He was intelligent, well-spoken, eccentric, but in 2008, During a custody dispute with his ex-wife, he kidnapped his daughter and vanished. A nationwide manhunt led to his capture, but with it came a discovery. There was no Clark Rockefeller. His real name was Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter, a German immigrant who had built his life entirely on lies. Over 2 decades, he impersonated aristocrats, Wall Street executives, even a filmmaker. And in 1994, bones were discovered in the backyard of a home he once lived in. They belonged to John Sohus, a man who'd gone missing in the 1980s. Gerhardsreiter was later convicted of his murder. He wasn't just a con man. He was a killer who had used charm and fiction as weapons. The case is a rare collision of identity fraud, social engineering, and murder. A man who fooled everyone until he couldn't anymore. He's now serving 27 years to life. But the myth of Clark Rockefeller still lingers as one of the most bizarre criminal personas ever created in the U.S. Rebecca Cororeium was a 24-year-old British crew member working aboard the Disney Wonder cruise ship. On March 22, 2011, she missed her shift. The last known footage of her shows her pacing a phone area, visibly upset, in the early hours. After that, nothing. Disney claims she likely went overboard, but no one saw it happen. The ship continued sailing. Her belongings were left untouched in her room. Her flip-flops, which some believe didn't belong to her, were found near the crew pool. What followed was one of the most secretive investigations in cruise history. Because the ship was registered in the Bahamas, a single officer was sent to investigate. He spent just 1 day on board. Rebecca's family believed there was more to the story. They were shown only limited CCTV footage. Other crew members whispered about internal warnings not to speak out. To this day, no one knows if Rebecca jumped, fell, or was pushed. Her parents say she loved life at sea and had recently planned a trip home. The case exposed troubling gaps in maritime law, where cruise ships often sail under flags of convenience, limiting responsibility and oversight. Rebecca's disappearance isn't just a mystery. It's a reminder that in international waters, justice can be as elusive as the sea itself. On December 2, 2010, 24-year-old Phoebe Hansjuk was found dead at the bottom of a garbage chute in a luxury Melbourne apartment complex. The drop was 12 stories, and she had landed feet first into an industrial trash compactor. Her death was ruled an accident. Police theorized she had climbed into the chute while intoxicated and fallen. But her family and many forensic experts disagreed. Phoebe was tall, athletic, and the opening to the chute was just 22 inches wide. She would have had to climb in backward, lift herself with no leverage, and slide down willingly, all while impaired by alcohol and prescription medication. Her boyfriend, a well-connected lawyer nearly twice her age, claimed he had no idea what happened. But text messages and diary entries revealed Phoebe had been struggling with mental health and feelings of control in the relationship. No charges were filed. But the coroner later criticized the investigation for serious oversights, including failure to preserve evidence and delayed toxicology reports. To this day, her case remains a disturbing mystery. Phoebe's law was later passed in her honor, mandating better safety standards for garbage chutes. But the questions around her death, and whether she entered that chute alone, still linger in Australia's collective memory. On April 1, 2006, med student Brian Schaffer went out with friends to celebrate spring break in Columbus, Ohio. They bar hopped, laughed, drank. Around 2 a.m., Brian was seen on security footage entering the Ugly Tuna Saloon bar. He was never seen leaving. Cameras covered every entrance and exit, except one, used only by staff. But even that door led to a locked service area under construction. He had no known enemies. His credit cards and phone were never used again. Police reviewed hours of footage. Nothing. He vanished inside a building with no easy way out. Theories exploded online. Some believed he was murdered and hidden before the bar closed. Others suggested he fell into a construction shaft. A few think he staged his own disappearance. His father spent years searching. Tragedy struck again when he died in a freak accident just before Brian's 30th birthday. Brian's girlfriend kept his voicemail active, calling occasionally to hear his voice. One time, the call rang 3 times before going to voicemail, but cell tower data couldn't confirm a location. The case remains one of the most baffling modern urban vanishings. A man walks into a bar and never walks out, and with each passing year, the exit becomes harder to explain. In 1978, over 900 people died in the middle of a jungle in Guyana, not from war or disaster, but by drinking poisoned punch at the direction of their religious leader, Jim Jones. Jones had started the People's Temple in the U.S. as a progressive church focused on racial equality and communal living. But over time, it twisted into something far darker. Members were forced to cut ties with families, endure humiliation, and give over all their money. Facing media scrutiny, Jones moved the group to a remote settlement in South America, Jonestown. Isolated and tightly controlled, life there turned bleak. Armed guards patrolled the grounds. Members were malnourished, fearful, and unable to leave. In November 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan traveled to Jonestown to investigate. While departing with several defectors, his group was ambushed at the airstrip. Ryan and others were killed. Hours later, Jones gathered his followers and ordered them to commit what he called revolutionary suicide. Cyanide-laced flavor aid was distributed. Mothers fed it to their children. Those who resisted were shot. By the end, 918 people were dead, including hundreds of children. Jones himself was found with a gunshot wound to the head. Jonestown remains one of the deadliest cult events in history, and the ultimate warning about unchecked influence, blind obedience, and what can happen when belief turns deadly. Sylvia Lyens was just 16 when she was left in the care of a woman named Gertrude Banishevsky while her parents worked out of state. It was supposed to be temporary. It turned into a nightmare. Over the course of 3 months, Sylvia was abused, starved, and tortured inside the Banishevsky home, not just by Gertrude, but by her own children and neighborhood kids. They burned her with cigarettes, locked her in the basement, carved words into her skin. No one stopped it. When Sylvia died in October 1965, the autopsy revealed she had suffered some of the most prolonged abuse ever documented in Indiana. Gertrude and several of the children were arrested. The trial shocked the country, not just for the cruelty, but for the number of people involved who did nothing. Sylvia's story has haunted generations. Her name is etched into the cultural memory of child abuse cases. A memorial now stands in her honor. The horror wasn't just in the crime, it was in how ordinary it looked from the outside. A quiet house, a mother, neighborhood kids, and a girl who suffered while the world kept turning. In 2001, German engineer Armin Maiwes posted an ad online seeking a volunteer, someone willing to be killed and eaten. Shockingly, someone answered. Bernd Brandes, a man in his 40s, willingly met Maiwes and agreed to the act. What followed was one of the most disturbing consensual crimes ever recorded. Maiwes filmed the entire event. Brandes reportedly consumed part of his own body before succumbing to blood loss. Maiwes then dismembered and stored the remains, consuming them over the course of several months. He was caught after bragging about it online. When police searched his home, they found the footage and a freezer full of human flesh. The case raised complex legal questions. Was it murder if the victim consented? Could consent even be valid in such a situation? Maiwes was convicted of manslaughter in 2004, then retried, and convicted of murder in 2006. He is serving a life sentence. The media dubbed him the Rotenburg Cannibal, and the story became global news, not just for its horror, but for what it said about isolation, obsession, and the darkest reaches of the internet. Even now, the case defies easy explanation. It's a true story that feels almost too surreal to believe, except it's all on tape. NXIVM presented itself as a self-help company, offering workshops for success, empowerment, and personal growth. Its founder, Keith Raniere, was charismatic, intellectual, and praised by followers as a genius. But behind the seminars and slogans, NXIVM operated as a pyramid scheme, and at its core, a secret society called DOS. Women were branded with Raniere's initials, forced into obedience, starved, and blackmailed. He called them slaves. They called him master. Several Hollywood actresses, including Allison Mack from Smallville, helped recruit women into the group. Many had no idea what they were joining until it was too late. In 2018, whistleblowers came forward. The FBI arrested Raniere and Mack. In court, victims described years of psychological manipulation, sexual exploitation, and emotional control. Raniere was convicted on charges including racketeering, sex trafficking, and forced labor. He's serving 120 years. NXIVM is a modern cult story, one that didn't require robes or compounds, just seminars, branding irons, and the illusion of success. The scariest part, many members still believe he was trying to change the world for the better. David Parker Ray called his soundproof trailer the Toy Box. From the outside, it looked like a storage unit. Inside, it was outfitted with chains, surgical tools, and recording equipment. Ray worked as a state park mechanic, but for over a decade he abducted women, drugging them, torturing them, and erasing their memories with sedatives. He kept detailed diaries of his crimes. He made audio tapes where he described in graphic detail what would happen to his victims. Some were released, with no memory of what had happened. He was finally caught in 1999 when a woman escaped, running through the streets in chains. She led police back to the trailer. What they found shocked investigators. A chamber of horrors, drawings, journals, even possible evidence of murders, though no bodies were ever conclusively tied to him. Ray died in prison before he could stand trial for all charges. His girlfriend and accomplices were convicted, but many questions remain. How many victims were there? Where are the bodies? The Toy Box case stands out not just for its cruelty, but for how long it went unnoticed. A monster hiding in plain sight, shielded by the desert and the silence of fear. On the evening of May 3, 2007, British toddler Maddie McCann vanished from her family's holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal. Her parents had gone to dinner at a nearby tapas restaurant, leaving the children asleep and checking on them periodically. But when her mother returned around 10 p.m., Maddie was gone. What followed was one of the most publicized missing persons cases in modern history. Posters, billboards, global media coverage. Everyone was looking for a little girl with bright blue eyes and a mark in her right eye. Portuguese police initially believed it was an abduction, but soon suspicion turned toward the parents. There was no sign of forced entry, no ransom, just silence. Years passed. Sightings were reported across Europe and Africa. Private investigators were hired. Theories exploded, from human trafficking to accidental death and cover-up. In 2020, a new suspect emerged, Christian Bruckner, a convicted sex offender who had been living near the resort at the time. But no charges have been filed, and to this day, Madeline's fate remains unknown. The case divided the world. Was it a botched investigation, a tragic accident, or a cold, calculated crime? Whatever the truth, Maddie McCann's name became more than a headline. It became a symbol of unanswered questions, media frenzy, and the haunting possibility that some disappearances never get closure. In 2008, 18-year-old Joshua Maddox left his home in Woodland Park, Colorado, for a walk and never returned. Known as a quiet, artistic teen, his disappearance baffled the community. There was no foul play, no enemies, no sign of struggle. Then, 7 years later, demolition workers tearing down an abandoned cabin just 2 blocks away made a grisly discovery: a skeleton wedged inside the chimney. It was Josh. His legs were bent upward in an unnatural position. His clothing lay neatly folded by the fireplace. No signs of trauma, no drugs in his system. The coroner ruled it an accidental death. The theory: Josh had tried to enter the cabin through the chimney and became trapped. But many didn't buy it. The cabin belonged to a man with a violent past. Rumors swirled of parties, squatters, and strange visitors. Friends said Josh would never climb into a chimney. Not in winter, not alone. The official story feels incomplete. Why were his clothes removed? Why didn't anyone hear cries for help? And how does someone vanish for 7 years in the middle of a neighborhood? The chimney holds no more answers, only a body, and questions sealed in soot and silence. Sister Kathy Sesnick was a 26-year-old Catholic nun and high school teacher in Baltimore when she disappeared in November 1969. Her body was found 2 months later, dumped in a wooded area, her skull fractured. The case went cold for decades, but in the 1990s, former students came forward with shocking claims. They said that Kathy had discovered widespread abuse at the school, led by Father Joseph Maskell, a priest who also served as the school counselor. One student, Jean Weiner, said she confided in Sister Kathy about the abuse, and shortly after, Kathy vanished. Another survivor claimed Maskell had taken her to view Kathy's body as a threat. Despite these allegations, Maskell was never charged. He fled the country, returned, and later died in 2001. DNA evidence from Kathy's crime scene did not match his. In 2017, the Netflix documentary The Keepers reignited interest in the case. New victims came forward, lawsuits were filed, but no one has been held accountable for Kathy's death. What happened to her may never be proven in court. Pedro Alonso Lopez was arrested in 1980, but by then, he claimed to have murdered over 300 young girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Authorities at first thought he was lying. Then, they found the graves. Lopez targeted girls between the ages of 8 and 12, often in poor or rural communities where disappearances were overlooked. He would lure victims with gifts, then vanish without a trace. In Ecuador, he led police to more than 50 bodies buried in shallow pits. He said he'd been killing for years, sometimes weekly. Lopez was convicted of 110 murders in 1980, but served only 14 years due to Ecuador's maximum sentence laws at the time. After release, he was deported to Colombia, declared insane, and institutionalized. But in 1998, he was declared sane and released. Since then, his whereabouts have been unknown. A warrant remains active, but no confirmed sightings have been made. Pedro Lopez may still be alive. He's been called the most prolific serial killer in history, yet few outside Latin America even know his name. It's not just the scale of his crimes that haunts people, it's the fact that the world let him go.